Coiled Thing. I have no idea what caused me to scan the classic cars section of the Arizona Republic that warm spring Phoenix morning in 1975. It was not a custom of mine to do so. Nevertheless, the next thing I knew, I was driving 40 minutes through the city, all the way to the far west side, to check out a 1950 Plymouth business coupe for sale by the original owner for $950. The car turned out to be in decent shape physically and ran like a top. With a good old 3-speed stick shift on the steering column, it was a 2-door with a big space behind the seat for samples or encyclopedias or whatever else businessmen found a need to carry around with them. The fact that I already had a perfectly good and much newer car seemed immaterial. I was instantly in love with this solid gray hunk of steel. I wrote the man on a check on the spot, told him I'd be back later to pick it up, and drove on to work singing like a fool. Barely 1 year later, I saw my ordered life dissolve into shambles. As my marriage broke up, I left my kids behind and took up a bumpy, always unpredictable life with the woman who would soon become wife number 2. Through those hectic times, the one stable, dependable feature in my life was Ben, which was the name I had given my good gray coupe. We were inseparable. Whatever little mechanical things might go awry with Ben, I found I could either fix myself or easily find a mechanic who could. The one exception was the windshield wipers, which were vacuum operated and never really worked. It didn't seem that important. Phoenix, after all, doesn't experience much rain. I became adept at peering through and around the spattered windshield when those occasions did occur. We drove together everywhere. Several years passed. Ben and I remained solidly together, as inseparable as Siamese twins, joined by the commonality of aging gaskets. One day, leaving work, he wouldn't start. Hailing a friend, I received a push around the parking lot. Ben remained asleep. With some trepidation, I called for a tow truck to convey us to my neighborhood repair shop. The verdict was delivered in an unseeming offhand manner by the mechanic. "She's froze up." I knew that was bad news. "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. Froze tight, won't budge." I knew it had not overheated and was mystified at this diagnosis. "So what can be done about it?" Not a dadgum thing. "Tow her to the junkyard. You'll never find another engine, and this one's sure shot." He turned away, resumed his work on another patient. I towed Ben home in mournful ceremony, parked him in the garage, started riding the bus to work, put all thoughts of him from my mind. 2 months later, I mentioned my sad tale to one of my co-workers. "You know," she said, "my husband Steve is pretty handy with old cars. Do you want him to take a look at yours?" Why not, I thought. A second opinion can't hurt. Steve came by that same evening. He crawled under and started rummaging. It went on for an hour while I stood on one foot and then the other, making polite small talk. When he finally crawled out, He held a weird-looking coiled thing in his hand. I don't know for sure, but this might be your real problem. See these worn-down teeth? It looked like they might be jammed in the flywheel. Why don't you see if you can find a replacement at the auto parts store, and I'll put it in tomorrow night. What about froze up? I ventured tentatively. Well, I can't be sure it's not, but let's do this first and see what happens. Next evening I stood again on one foot and then the other, my heart in my throat as Steve struggled underneath, putting in the new coiled thing. After an hour he crawled out. Okay, get in and see if she'll start. With trembling hand I inserted the key, turned it to the right. The engine turned over. I pumped some gas, tried again. It roared to life, quickly muted down to its old familiar soft purr. I guess that was it after all, Steve grinned. So it wasn't froze? No, not even close. That guy didn't have a clue. But I could have towed my best buddy to the junkyard, I exclaimed. Probably would have if you hadn't come out. I owe you a bundle. Forget it. Let's just have a beer. Epilogue. Ben and I continued to go steady until I moved away from Phoenix in 1985. At that point, I gave him to my son Eddie, who brought the car with him a couple of years later when he moved to Santa Barbara. He covered over the original gray paint with a coat of gorgeous mint green. Eventually, he passed Ben on to his good friend Leslie. She adores Ben, says she'll never give him up. She has a mechanic named Joe who takes care of every problem. Joe likes Ben nearly as much as she does. He spends weekends browsing for hard-to-find parts, which Ben might need someday. I live in Santa Barbara myself now. Every so often I run across Ben, parked along Anapamu Street, or in the nearby public lot. It feels good to give him a pat on the hood for old time's sake. We go back a long way.